We are live, but I think you're muted, Dave.
I am live. We're live. My voice was raspy, so it's good I was muted. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone around the world. Just good day. We're here to start another episode of the .NET Doc Show, and we're excited to have our special guest, Olia. Olia, say a word about yourself and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olia Gavrysh, and I'm working as a program manager at Microsoft on .NET team. I'm focusing on .NET Desktop, so working on WPF tooling, Winforms tooling and platform, migrating from .NET Core to from .NET Framework to .NET Core, and in future to .NET 5. I'm very excited to be on this show.
That's a lot. That's so amazing. So it seems like you do a lot of stuff. That's incredible. So you mentioned the desktop. So like what is that all about?
So lately, you probably have heard we had big news that we open source Windows Forms and WPF, and we also made them available on .NET Core. So before, they were targeting only .NET Framework, and now developers can choose. Do they want to target new .NET Core platform, or do they want to target all .NET Framework? And it's been a lot of work. It's been super exciting for us and for our users as well. And this year, you also probably have heard that we are releasing a new united platform called .NET 5. And here we take all the best from all the .NETs that we had before, .NET Framework, .NET Core, and Mono. And from now on, it will be one .NET. So users don't have to be confused. Which one should I target? Should my library target .NET Standard? Should I go with .NET Core Framework? It's going to be all .NET. And the number 5, do you guys know why it's called 5?
Because
I get
numbers
sometimes.
Because numbers? No, is it 4.8, 5? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We just picked the highest number among all the versions for .NET that exist right now. For .NET Framework, it's 4.8. For .NET Core, it's 3.1. So 5 is like the next version for everything. Even though sometimes people say, why didn't you pick 42?
Yeah, versioning is hard and naming things.
Right.
Yeah.
David has a similar problem with his Twitter handle. We wonder what happened to David Pine 6 all the time.
Well, David Pines 1 through 6. Yeah.
Yeah, they've all been consumed. I don't know. It's my lucky number. All right, it's significant. We don't have to recap that. Awesome. Should we start our checkup already, you think? Is it too soon to do that?
I'm okay with starting the checkup.
So who's going to tell us about the doc this week?
Cool. So I'll go ahead and do that. So the doc for this week is focused on migrating your .NET Framework app over to this shiny new platform known as .NET Core. Give you a quick overview of what you would see in the doc that I'm sharing here. Essentially, different migration strategies is what we're focusing on here. Tools that you can use to migrate to .NET Core. And I'd also point out that you're not limited to .NET Core. There are tools like the .NET Portability Analyser that's referenced here, which is actually a Visual Studio extension that would allow you to target really any .NET platform. Say, for example, you want to migrate to .NET Framework class library to .NET Standard. You could do that as well. That's, the tool is linked here. Another tool that you'll see referenced in this doc is the .NET Try .NET Core Global Tool. It's an open source.
Try Convert, right?
Try Convert.
Yeah.
Yep. I think the doc is slightly outdated in that regard, but the instructions are the same. Open source tool that would attempt to migrate your .NET Framework app over to .NET Core. Other things you'll see discussed in the doc are just general migration strategies. things like using precompiler directives. So, hashtag if some target framework moniker, and you can include logic within that precompiler directive that would only execute for that particular target framework. Net 4.5, Net 4.8, whatever you decide to include there. That could be a migration strategy you use moving forward. Anything else related to this that we wanted to discuss in the checkup?
Yeah, why would someone want to migrate over, and how common is that? Like, I mean, I know that there's a lot of old applications that are targeting .NET framework that were running exclusively on Windows, but is it really common for this migration path? Like, how common is that?
I think I can answer that one. So as you guys know, .NET Core is that, as you said, new shiny platform. We created it a few years ago, and we were able to learn from the past, because .NET Framework has been around for a very long time. And we figured out what are bottlenecks for our users, and we fixed them in .NET Core. So moving on, .NET Core will be the platform for .NET, and the .NET 5 that I mentioned before, it's fully based on .NET Core. So when you migrate to .NET Core, you have a clear path to .NET 5. And for .NET Framework, we are stop evolving this branch. So the latest version, 4.8, it will be there. .NET Framework will be supported. We will release all security fixes, Windows updates. We have our apps targeting .NET Framework as well, so we're not going to kill it, apps such as Visual Studio are still on .NET Framework. But moving on, we encourage to use .NET Core for your new applications and for applications that you're developing currently. Because .NET Core, that is a fast track where we will be releasing all the new features, updates, improvements, they all go in .NET Core. So if you want your application to benefit from all that, you need to target .NET Core.
So, Olia, let me ask a question.
Sure.
So I don't really follow desktop development a lot. I'm really a web guy more than anything. I understand there's like some limitations as to what platforms we can use, and what's the story for that, and where's it going, and what's in the future there.
Yeah, so Windows Forms and WPF will remain Windows-only platforms. And that is because they are built on Windows. They have a very high dependency on Windows APIs, and it would not make any sense for us to move them to other platforms because it will be a huge amount of work and probably not the best experience. But we're also working in the direction for cross-platform desktop, and you probably have heard about Maui. That is our new project that will be released in future, and it will be desktop that targets multi-platform.
That's awesome. I do have one question before we move into the hallway track. I was curious. So with like the evolution of, coming from .NET Framework, and then .NET Core hits and it's introduced, and then we have this .NET Standard, which is like, all the abstractions, and you could target that and then run on multiple runtimes, and life was great. What's going to happen with .NET Standard now that .NET 5 is coming out?
That is a great question. So once we are on .NET 5, then .NET Standard kind of is not needed anymore, right? There will be one platform. But if you want to be compatible with the previous applications that are targeting .NET Framework, .NET Core, then you can use .NET Standard to support that multi-targeting. So for now, to allow your applications work seamlessly with other applications that are targeting different platforms, you can use .NET Standard for your libraries. In future, bright shiny future, when everything targets .NET 5, we would not have a need for .NET Standard.
Awesome, thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition over into the hallway track, and I'm hoping that all of our guests today will ask questions and make this like a pseudo circle in a hallway, right? So we can ask Olia questions and just keep the conversation going. So let's start that segment. The hallway track. Yay.
Yay! Right, so I'm excited to answer all the questions, and meanwhile, while I'm waiting for that, I can show you what new great things we have in desktop world. And all the new things are, if you guys want to see the latest and greatest, you can check out Visual Studio Preview channel. So we have 2 channels for Visual Studio. The regular one, that's where all the mature feature go, everything like work is done, everything is reliable, tested, and that's what usually users use. But if you want to know what is new out there, we don't want to make you wait till we are completely done with the feature and completely finish the work. We can give you a glimpse on what is in development right now. And of course, we released their already kind of mature versions, so they should not fall apart. It's safe to go ahead and try to test them. And to do so, you can go to visualstudiomicrosoft.com vs preview and download the preview version of Visual Studio. We also have release notes, back to docs. In Visual Studio, right now it's 2019. You can check out preview release notes, and here you'll see what new features and improvements were added for each preview. Once you download Visual Studio, let me open my instance, you will see a preview marker right here. And I, in my Visual Studio, see in preview, that's internal preview, that's even faster track. That one updates every few days, but that's part of my job. I need to test the features before they got to you.
That's cool. I didn't know that existed, and I'm internal, so I should be living there.
Yeah, you should. That is more dangerous, I can tell that. But also the latest things there. And because it is preview, of course, we might have some bugs. We're also working on the features, so we value your feedback. If you found a bug, or if you have opinion that you want to share, if you want to give us your feedback about some features, if you notice that something is missing, that's how you can reach out to us. Click on this icon and either report the problem or suggest a feature. We read all that, and that's how we prioritize our work. That helps us great time when we are working on the feature. So please give us your feedback. We do read every single item that you report.
So, Olia, we do have a question from our friend Isaac Levin in the chat here. And let's address that now before we move on.
Great.
Isaac's question is, will there be any breaking changes with the .NET 5 release for desktop apps?
So between .NET Core and .NET 5, for desktop workloads, Winforms, and WPF, there won't be any major breaking changes. And we have a page, breaking changes. I can search them and insert, but I don't remember anything major that would break your application. We had a breaking change between 3.0 and 3.1 in Winforms, and that's when we removed obsolete controls such as menus that were obsolete since 2000, a very long time ago, and they were no longer in the toolbox. But now we decided to pull a plug because we needed to move further to add all the accessibility, support in the new designer. We realized that we cannot drag them along. So that was a breaking change. But it was super easy to fix because we had the new controls that have same functionality, same signature, and updating from the old ones to new ones. In case you were using the old ones, like my friend, it took 1 hour to discover the problem, read about it, update it, and check it. So I don't anticipate any big problems.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Sure. Right. If you don't have any more questions right now, I can continue, but please chime in, ask your questions. I'm super excited to hear what you guys think, answer all the questions you have, and so on. So we were talking about Visual Studio Preview, and Visual Studio Preview also has preview features. So because we're enabling all the features we're about to release, but maybe you are here just for some, but not for everything. Maybe you want to check out one preview feature, but you want to disable everything else. You can certainly do that. You can go to Tools, Options, and here click Preview Features. These are all preview features that kind of in development, but already somewhat mature to be in the Visual Studio. And today we will talk about expanded design time data support, new WPF XAML designer for .NET Framework, XAML binding failures, and XAML suggested actions. So if you want that feature, you can just check it. If that doesn't work for you somehow, we're trying to not introduce any breaks, but if you don't like it, you can always uncheck it. Some features require restart of the Visual Studio, but then you can go and put your Visual Studio back into previous state.
I really love that because, a lot of times feature toggles were something that were managed by the publisher of an application or a website. Now they're actually allowing the consumer to opt into these features, which is awesome.
Yeah. So a few more improvements that we did. We did lots of improvements in XAML tooling, and I'm super excited to show all of them. So let's start with XAML, and let's start easy. You probably have seen this in-app toolbar, right? And some people absolutely love it, but some people complain that it blocks something on their application. So one thing we did, we made it thinner. It was larger, so it was hovering over the menus usually. Now it's smaller. Another thing, now you can move it. You can move it anywhere you want.
Oh, that's nice. Because I do a little bit of desktop stuff, and I used to notice that. And I'd be like, oh, it's in the way. I can't.
Yes. Initially, when you're not used to it, it's just like there and annoys some people. Then you can make it smaller, and you can make it even smaller. And if you're still hate it, then you can go to Live Visual Tree, and here you can disable it. So now, two monitors, my app is jumping back and forth. Now it's gone. If I stop the app, run it again, it will be gone until I enable it here again. And now it's back. So that's
so cool.
Yeah. Now people who were not fans, they can easily get rid of it. All right, the next thing that we did in XAML, we added inline color previews.
Oh, that's so cool too. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And actually, I don't have an example, but when you don't even have the name for the color, but you just have the code like FFFABCA, now you can see how that color looks like.
And does it accept hex colors as well? So you could do like pound.
Yeah, exactly.
555 or something.
Yeah, right. So these are inline colors. Next thing, that is a much bigger feature, design time data. To enable design time data, you go, as I showed, Tools Options, Preview Features, find here design time data, it was right here, and make sure you have the checkbox on. Once you do that, let me give you a good example. So that's another request from our developers that we got the feedback and we decided that we have to make their life easier. That is, when you're developing your applications, as you know, WPF is all about data binding, right? And if you're on the early state, you putting together your UI, you don't have a view model yet, or you don't have the data yet, or maybe another case, your application is so large that actually running the app and going to hot reload takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. And in the designer, if you're using data binding, you cannot see your controls be filled with data, right? Then controls will be empty. So our users told us we want to be able to see how it looks like, right? When I'm designing, I can put some like list view, data grid, and then when I have actual data, then I see that, okay, that doesn't fit, that doesn't look good. how we solve this problem. Now we added a capability where you can add any property, you can add dcolumn and set the value that will be displayed only in the designer during the design time, but it won't be compiled. So let's start with a simple example. Let me go, for example, here, and I have a list header. I can say dcolon header. And I can say test. Oh, that's another new improvement. Before, so the limitation is once we update something here, it doesn't get immediately here. We need to close it and start. But now we added the button refresh. So when we click refresh, see, this is text. Now we can say test 111, refresh, test 111.
That's awesome. Those are some subtle improvements, but I know that they're going to save a lot, people a lot of time. I love the design aspect of it.
Yeah.
Is there an actual name for that feature? Is that a hot reload that's going on, or what feature is that?
This one is a design time data, and that is when you can add dcolumn to any property and mock the value for that property in the designer. Because, for example, okay, let me give an example, show you again. Let's say test 1, 2, 3. Right now, here I see test 1, 2, 3, but if I run the application,
you'll expect to see a different.
That is the list. Right?
Yeah, because it's only at design time, so you can visualize and kind of plot it out.
Yes.
That's really cool.
And that is also very safe place for experimenting, because you know that even if you check in that code, once it gets compiled, this dcolon just gets ignored completely. It's not compiled in your code.
That's awesome.
And yeah, of course, for list, it doesn't look, for header, it doesn't look that impressive because it's pretty easy to change it here as well, right? But if we go to more complex controls, for example, we have list view or list box, a tree view, then here we usually would use data binding. And when we don't have view model or when our data is not ready, we can mock it. So we can say dcolon list view dot source item source, and we can hard code those values. So right now, I don't have data binding for my app. And when I run the app, it's empty, right? Data is not coming. I don't know how it looks. I don't know if that is big enough or small. And in the designer, now my designer is even more advanced than my application. I can just hard code the values and see how that looks with my controls. And you can tell that I've been watching Big Bang Theory lately, because those are all
That's awesome.
Now, if we go to more complex scenario, data grid. Data grid requires view model. View model requires the model. I have employee. Thank you. And in my employee, I have first name, last name, email. I have order status, which is a public enumeration. So this is my model. And let's say I want to be able to see it in my data grid. When I was doing a little bit of UI development, I always struggled that when my data comes from data binding, and I don't know how big should be my grid, how big should be my columns, does it look okay or not? I had to run the app, make sure that all data gets connected, look at it, then I can use hot reload, but it's not always convenient. Now you can do it all in the designer, and you can use design time data for data grid.item source. And here I'm using arrays. I'm using models.employee. So even in property windows, I see all those values. These are my hard-coded values.
That is so
and
cool.
Look at it. Even status is working. enum is working.
Right. So you get the enum value. So basically it like projects into that POCO type, the employee, like the
Exactly.
model, and it allows you. That is so clever. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Do you have any questions so far?
I've got a question that's more, it's like a higher level question. So like I know that with the evolution of desktop development for .NET, it's been, .NET Framework on Windows, and then there was Winforms. And that's actually where I started my career. It was in Winforms, but with VB before, I was messing around with C#.
Yeah.
And then I learned about XAML and WPF. And then, years later, UWP came out, and that's also XAML, but like a different flavor. So now that we're kind of revamping and taking a step back and saying that you can use .NET Core with all of these desktop platforms, how as a developer do I decide which one I should be using and why?
That is a great question. And WPF, Winforms, they're slightly different, right? And they are tools to do their job. So you should pick the one that better suits your needs. And of course, your preference, your skills, expertise, and so on. WPF is better when we are talking about fluent designs, when you want your screen to be adjustable to different sizes, and so on. Winforms has its benefits, and the first one that they hear from my users is such an easy getting started experience, right? Because in Winforms, to create UI, it takes you no time. You just drag and drop controls. You don't worry about XAML. You don't worry about grid, because in WPF, as you know, everything is in the grid. You need to make sure you set it in the proper places. In Winforms, you just toolbox, drag, drop, run, done.
Interesting. So do you see that there's going to be any like design time advancements to some of the, WPF and UWP, such that they might get that same type of design time feeling? Like I can see that you're starting to almost get there, but
Yeah,
are you expecting a toolbox?
So but we have a toolbox. It's right here, and you still can drag and drop things. But the problem is then when we drag and drop things, then you need to, because everything in XAML is based on grid, like everything is inside grid. You need to set the right position. Then sometimes it has so before it also had hard-coded margins, sizes, etc., which annoyed our users a lot. And now we are improving it. We're trying to make that experience as good as we can. And that is like one of my biggest tasks for this period, is to learn what our users are happy with and what they're not happy, how they would like the experience to be, and try to make it happen.
Awesome. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah, please give us your feedback, reach out. That is super useful. I'm posting surveys. I'm doing some user interviews. If you have something to say about WPF experience, how you want it to be, what annoys you, what you need us to fix, please reach out. You can always reach out to me on Twitter. And I think under my picture there is @Olia Gavrysh. I'm always happy to hear your feedback.
I have another question that I'll ask Olia while we're in this question state. So I think a lot of customers have heard of this new Maui initiative.
Yes.
And to take David's question a step further, they might be wondering, okay, so what does that mean for my existing investments in things like Winforms and WPF? Do those sort of disappear once Maui becomes a thing?
No, they're not going to disappear. We're investing very heavily in Winforms and WPF. We just brought them to core, and we will continue innovating those areas. So they will develop as a parallel tracks. And the reason why we would not kill Winforms and WPF, because we have the largest amount of users among all platforms are on Winforms and then WPF. So we have so many users all over the world, we will never pull a plug on those platforms. Oh, maybe eventually, of course, but while we have users, we are serving them. That's our first priority.
And that makes a lot of sense. We actually have a comment in the chat that says, nothing ever disappears. I know developers still working on VB6. In fact, I think David Pine was just writing some VB6 last night.
I may have been. I don't know what I write
Oh.
anymore.
Awesome. All right. Then another feature I wanted to show is called suggested actions. So when you click on the control, you have this light bulb, and when you expand it, you get access to most used properties and actions. And you can do the same thing in property window, but this one, you've heard, it's very overloaded. That's a lot of stuff there, and sometimes users want to immediately change like name, background color. They don't want to go there and search for them. Now they can do it much easier. And to enable the suggested actions, that's same, tools options, preview features, find suggested actions, make sure it is checked. Next thing I wanted to show you is called binding failures. And I have a different application for that. The entire purpose of this application is to have lots of binding failures. So nothing is working in it. And when we run, let me first show you the experience we had before this feature. So,
while that's loading, what's a binding failure? Like, what does that actually mean?
Oh, that is like when you're binding to your data, if the connection cannot be resolved, if there is some error, then you got the binding error. And the problem with it, the problem with that is, so that is what we had before. I'm running my app, I have lots of binding errors, but I don't know about it. I don't have a way to see that. In output window, if I go up, I will be able to see some errors, see binding expression pass error. But again, I might not notice that. There's a lot of stuff happening in output window. So now...
Yeah, I never use the output window personally.
Right. Yeah, nobody looks there. Now on in-app toolbar, we added this icon about binding failures, and it tells you that, okay, something went wrong. There are some failures. If you click on it, it will take you to a new panel, XAML binding failures, and it will list everything that didn't work. Then this is the regular panel as everything else, so you can move it, dock it, you can sort, filter, you can search in binding errors. Like, let's search for color. Yep, we got some errors for color. You can right-click and do copy original error, copy column. You can reset columns because you can modify everything. You can get to the state where you don't recognize your data anymore. And then you can just do right-click, reset, and get everything back. An extremely useful thing for me, at least here, is combine duplicates. Because once I got errors, let me clear and do it again. So I'll add a person. I got some errors. I add another person. I got more errors. I want to know how many unique errors do I have. I can combine, and that's how many. And this number tells me how many types of this error can have happened. So once I add more, the increment increases.
I love that. That's a great feature.
Yeah, it's super useful.
We actually have a question here from our friend Richard, writing code. He says, besides cross-platform support, from your perspective, what are the other value propositions for Maui over WinForms and WPF?
That is a great question.
That is a good question, but I don't think I am the person to answer that. I think we need to talk to Maui PM because I've been focusing on WinForms and WPF. But I know that Maui is built on based on Xamarin Forms. So everything that you expect from Xamarin Forms, that you will probably see that in Maui. If you like that experience, I guess that's the way to go. Yeah.
So how does that? I guess what's the when it comes time to pick out a UI framework, if we're deciding between Maui and we're deciding between WinForms and WPF, I mean, you being the WPF and WinForms person, what criteria do you use to say, well, you should do WinForms? What's the determining factor there?
Well, it usually depends on, first, do you have other projects? Do you need to integrate with them? Is there reusable code that exists? Do you have a skill set? Do you have preference? Do you like XAML or not? Do you like drag and drop experience or not? Do you need your application to be scalable? How customized the UI should look like? Because in WPF, they're way more like gradients. It's much easier to do all those things. So basically, you look at all the requirements for application, skill sets, what other apps do you want to integrate with? Do you want to reuse code, and so on?
I'm curious too if Maui, being with Xamarin Forms, is going to then be mobile ready, whereas the desktop experience you get from like WinForms and WPF would not. You can't run that on a mobile, right?
So yeah, WinForms and WPF, I'm having a very hard time imagining on mobile device, like on the phone. Like, that would not look good, right?
I kind of feel like we tried that back in the late 90s with Windows CE, right?
Yeah, right.
I actually used to develop for Windows CE and Windows Mobile earlier in my career when I did WinForms stuff. And it was WinForms, but it was CE, compact edition.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I did that in the very early years of my career when I was a developer. Maui, I hope that Maui PM will also join the show and tell us about all the great things they're working on. Probably will be a better person to promote Maui than I am. I haven't, I barely looked at it, to be honest.
Cool. So, Olia, if you were to take a step back from what you were just talking about for a minute, I'm interested in hearing what excites you the most about desktop development in the 5.0 wave of .NET.
So the first thing that excites me the most is that it is possible, right? That those technologies are going to target the latest platform. So they will get access to all the benefits, all the new things, such as the latest language features, C#9 and future C#10, 11, and so on. Performance improvements. There have been lots of performance improvements in .NET Core and in .NET 5 accordingly. And now desktop applications can benefit from that. Side-by-side deployment, when you can have multiple versions of the platform on the same machine. And that actually allows us to innovate at much faster pace because we're not afraid to break our customers as we were with .NET Framework. Right? For .NET Framework, there was one version on the machine. If you update to newer version and some changes don't work with your app, well, then you're broken. With .NET Core, you can have as many different versions on your machine. And when I say .NET Core, same applies to .NET 5, right? That is the habit, but this paradigm hasn't changed. .NET 5 adopted the architecture of .NET Core with all the side-by-side versions, perf improvements, and so on. So yeah, go ahead, Sarah. You wanted to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna, I guess, ask a probing question. So like I'm thinking about like how, all these desktop applications that exist today and what's really out there and how could they benefit from some of the performance, things that you talked about with .NET Core and whatnot. So like Visual Studio is a beast of an application and it consumes a ton of resources on a machine. Out of curiosity, it's not running on .NET Core, is it? Do you know?
No, Visual Studio is .NET Framework.
So would they benefit from porting over? And is that something that you think we might see in the future?
Maybe there's a lot of work to do that. And right now we keep it on Framework. We don't have that urgent agenda to move it to Core because lots of things are there and it will require major refactoring. And that's why we're saying that it's totally fine to keep your apps on .NET Framework if these apps are done, right? They're in production, they're working, you don't want to touch the code, you don't need any updates, you don't want to introduce any new features, then it's fine to leave them on .NET Framework. But if you want new things, then try to port to .NET Core and .NET 5.
Yeah,
And-
relative to the conversation, someone just chimed in and said that VS isn't that bad nowadays compared to like Spotify or Slack or some of the other Electron apps out there. So, I mean, Electron though, that's JavaScript. So it's right. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
Big difference.
This does lead into another related conversation, though. So if we were to, I guess, port Visual Studio over to .NET Core or what will be .NET 5, that could unlock the ability to make Visual Studio a cross-platform IDE to the point that tools like VS for Mac and VS Code wouldn't be as essential as they are today.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I wonder if that's ever in the cards.
Yeah. Easier said than done, of course. But
yeah, absolutely.
Just makes you wonder.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about other apps though too, like locally I have Camtasia and video processing and some of these things that are really, really intensive and require a lot of machine resources. I kind of want to start playing with developing stuff that way to see how the new .NET Core would be running, a desktop app that way.
Absolutely.
Cool. Olia, another question for you I had in the back of my mind. So I know we might have folks in the audience right now who use the .NET CLI for everything. Mm-hmm. So instead of going to File, New Project in Visual Studio, they're running maybe a .NET New command. Mm-hmm. What does the .NET New experience look like for desktop apps in .NET 5?
It is supported from CLI as well. So same way you can do .NET New Winforms, .NET New WPF, and get the app running, created, built, run from CLI.
Cool.
So a few more features, if you don't mind me going on. I have lots of things to share.
Yes,
but
please.
Let's make questions the priority. So interrupt me when you have questions.
Will do.
When questions are coming. And meanwhile, I'll just be showing stuff. Another new feature that I wanted to show related to XAML Designer. So what we just saw, that was all Designer for .NET Core and this one even .NET 5 projects. If we double click, we see the project file and target framework .NET 5. By the way, that also is a new thing. See, before it was .NET Core app 3.1. Now it's just .NET 5, .NET 5.0, new target framework version. And this designer serves .NET Core, .NET 5 applications. For .NET Framework, we used to have the designer that was like many years old. And right now we have two different code bases, right? The .NET Framework designer and .NET Core, the new designer. New designer is much better. There are lots of performance improvements. I know performance was one thing that our users were not happy about for WPF. So we fixed many things for .NET Core. And what we're doing now, we're going to switch to that new paradigm for .NET Framework applications as well. So we are bringing that new designer for applications that target .NET Framework. And that is in preview as well. If you go Tools Options, here you can find, let's put it together, new WPF XAML Designer for .NET Framework requires restart. So if you opt in, you will get the same designer, the same code base as for .NET Core for your application if you're targeting .NET Framework. So all these new features that I showed, they will be available for your .NET Framework applications as well. And I encourage you to do that. And right now, we still by default, unless you opt in into that preview feature, you have old designer. But eventually, we're going to switch to the new one. So that's one thing that we are going to switch. and change. But before we do that, we want to make sure that all controls vendors have enough time to test their controls and make sure that they support that model. So we're working very closely with all the major control vendors. And if you are developing third-party controls and if you have any issues with this new paradigm, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to work with you no matter how big or small you are. I want to make sure that you have a clear path to this new paradigm. All right. So that was news about WPF, UWP Designer, XAML Designer. And now we can talk about Winforms. So what is happening in Winforms world? Let me open another instance of Visual Studio. So Winforms tooling is going slightly behind because we started first developing this out-of-process architecture for Designer for XAML Designer first. And just to explain, Visual Studio is still .NET Framework, right? And now when you're developing Winforms .NET Core application, that is .NET Core. These things live in different processes. So now we had to re-architect the designer to make sure that it works and talks between two different processes, .NET Framework and .NET Core. And that's why it took us a lot of time. For XAML Designer, we were like halfway there when we were developing this new paradigm that allows us to get performance benefits. And we were able to reuse some learnings, but not all of them. But in Winforms, we are working on enabling the designer. So the goal is to get the same designer that that our users had for .NET Framework, that they will have same designer for .NET Core. And as you can see, this is .NET 5 application, Winforms application, target framework .NET 5, use Windows Forms true. When we go to our form, we have all the controls. Almost all the controls are enabled already. So you can go ahead, build your applications. The experience is not as smooth yet because it's work in the process. And we release updates every preview. So if you are eager to try new things, you can port your Winforms application right now. Just be prepared that designer experience might not be perfect yet. Keep on the latest preview version. But if you want to be on the reliable, complete version, then November 2020 is the time when you want to migrate to .NET Core. That's when we will release the new designer. And let me show you what is a managerial PowerPoint slide, but that is our plan for Visual Studio 16.8 and Visual Studio 16.9. So we have support for all controls except those things, and these things are coming in 16.8 and 16.9.
So, Olia, I have a question for you. Let's say I am using a high-resolution display, and I'm using one of these designers, say the Winforms designer. Has the engineering team supported high-resolution displays in the designer?
Yeah, they are supported, but there's still work to be done. We have some issues with high DPI. We had lots of issues before. We implemented certain improvements, and that is still work in process. And right now we had to focus all the team on the enabling .NET Core designer. And once this is done, we go back to high DPI improvements, and we make sure that there are no issues for Winforms experience. There might be some, but there are workarounds. And I can also dig up the article on how to work with that. So you're enabled. There are different high DPI modes, and switching between those modes can help you with fixing the issues.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So we also have some news in Winforms platform, Winforms runtime, and that's where we got so much help from our open source community. And I'm so thankful. I would like to thank everyone who participated, who reported issues, who suggested features, who committed PRs. That was a great help for Winforms. Since we open sourced it, we received over 146 community PRs. Can you imagine?
That's amazing. And
Yes.
that's what I love about open source is like when you open source something, like the community who supports it and loves it is there to help out. And that's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, it's been absolutely great. Some open source contributors are became almost the team members. I used to see them at conferences before the quarantine. We keep in chat. We are so thankful. We hope that we will be able to see them eventually after the quarantine is over, and thank them. And one feature that I wanted to point out is a Windows task dialog. So that is a completely new feature in Windows Forms. After not touching this code base, not adding new features for quite a long time, right? Winforms was considered like completed platform, mature, but not getting new improvements. Now we started adding new things to Winforms as well. And that's to the question, like if we're gonna abandon it. No, we're gonna invest in this platform. And Windows Task Dialog, you can think of a message box on steroids. So it's a super advanced, super customizable message box. And let me just show you some screens. So you can do things like that. You can do things like that. You can go in elevated mode. You can have like those.
That is so cool. I love that.
Yeah. Notifications, all the like footers, links, etc. And progress bar. You can even have many pages. So it shows you something, then it switches to next one, depending on which buttons you click. It goes to one page or another, and so on. What is amazing about this pull request, now prepare yourself, it was completely done by open source contributor Konstantin Kaiser.
No way.
Yes.
The amount of like coverage there and just like that issue, like the pull request, like the description of it and all the screenshots, the details of it, like, oh my gosh, how many files did they have to touch here? This
Oh my god,
PR is incredible.
We can look it up, but I would guess like something about it's hundreds and hundreds of files.
That's amazing.
It was a lot of work, and while Konstantin was working on it, we were inviting him to our team API reviews. We were reviewing it with him, giving him feedback, like get him participating in our calls. That was amazing because he is located in Germany, so the time difference was rough. So we're so thankful that he was able to contribute it and did like incredible amount of work for this feature.
Yeah, that's really remarkable. That's kudos to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, I don't think I have PRs handy, but we did improvements in the list view, and that was done by our intern. That's why it is also remarkable. We had a intern, Lonnie, that joined for a summer, and she was able to make improvements in Winforms that will go in .NET 5. So her intern job will forever be in the platform. It changed the platform. And I think it's like truly amazing. I wish I could have that experience during my internship. And we have amazing interns. She was absolutely brilliant, and we're super excited to have more talented people. And we promise to give them interesting tasks.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think if I recall correctly, the .NET Portability Analyzer was actually an intern project as well. And look at how great that turned out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're looking at, we're using it everywhere. Yeah. All right. And at the end, I wanted to show this article about .NET Core for Windows Desktop, which basically answers the questions that we already talked through. Is why do you want to care about .NET Core and .NET 5? Why you might want to port, and how to do so. And this article also, here's the breaking changes, and that's a link to breaking changes. I guess that article answers the questions that we were just talking about. getting started experience, getting started with WPF, with Winforms. We recorded short videos. There is a video, what is the difference between core and framework. Same for core applies to .NET 5. And there is a chapter for porting from framework to core with a try convert tool. So that describes how to use try convert. It's pretty easy. That tool might not work in all the cases, and that is the reason why we call it try convert, not like convert for sure. But that is the nature of all the variety of project files. Like, they're very different, right? And it was impossible to write the software that will cover all the cases and work 100% sure all the time. But we decided to still do something. And if that automates 80-90% of the cases, I think that's still a much better result than making users doing it all by hand. So,
Agreed.
yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Well,
yeah.
Well, we got about 5 minutes, and I know you said you have to jump off to go to the next amazing stream
Sure.
that you're going to do. So we'll let you go, and thank you so much for coming on. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Olia.
Thank you.
So that was Olia, and that was amazing. So some closing thoughts on that. I think it's really cool that we were able to cover so much ground. We talked about, migrating from .NET Framework to .NET Core. We touched on some of the actual feature toggles that exist within Visual Studio, the IDE itself, which is really cool. Some of the stuff I didn't even learn. I just learned a bunch myself from that. We talked about Winforms and WPF and UWP and MAUI and design time data for visualizations and binding failures and .NET 5 and all these amazing things. And we covered a lot of ground, and I learned a lot. I don't know about you guys.
I just want to point out there just a little bonus. We didn't have the camera on Olia at the time, but we did have a bonus appearance by Emo. When he came in and delivered, I don't know, her coffee or something.
Oh, we didn't have the camera on?
No, the camera wasn't on, but she thanked him, and so that was Emo walking in and walking out. But
that's amazing. I thought that was live. Yeah,
we need to fire our camera guy. Clearly,
that's amazing.
You had one job.
I don't know. Wait. Was that one job to focus on Emo? Because if you're right, then yeah, I totally messed it up.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add, we do have a link that Olia provided for all of the resources that were shared throughout the hallway track segment. You're seeing that on the bottom of the screen here. Definitely go there if anything interested you with what she was talking about. The other thing I've forgot to mention with the doc that we showcased in the checkup, if you haven't used that Portability Analyser extension, I called out that it's an extension for VS. There's also a command line option. So if you're not on Windows using Visual Studio, we've still got you covered with a command line experience for that tool.
Awesome.
I guess that's all I had for closing thoughts. We do hope that y'all tune in next week. I believe we've got Cecil Phillip on the show. I think Dapper is the topic. So not the micro ORM, but the other Dapper, DAPR.
Yeah. I'm just going to talk about reverse proxies. I think that's a good call out, not the other Dapper. We talked about versioning being, troublesome, but naming things is just as hard, if not harder. Because there's multiple Dappers. That's a problem. This has been fun. Until next time.
Indeed. Until next time. See you next week, everybody.
Bye, friends.
Thank you, everyone.